Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. Oh man, we are going to have like a totally awesome show. In the first hour, we're going to be speaking with Shannon Dorey about the Nummo and the mythology of the Dogon. And in the second hour, we're going to be speaking with Alex Treplish about his book, In the Beginning, the Epic of the Anunnaki. But don't forget, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com and the Institute of Applied Energetics, where you can get information about medical intuition training or sessions, intuitive counseling, or energy work. If you do stop by the Just Energy Radio webpage, please do sign up for our newsletter to keep you informed of all the outstanding programming that comes on this show. It's also where you can access our over 6 years, oh my God, it's almost going on 7 years, worth of archives of the show. You can also check out the show on our YouTube channel. That's Just Energy Radio on YouTube. And if you check it out there, please do subscribe to our channel because it'll let you know every time we post a new show. You can also hear Just Energy Radio on the Inception Radio Network, obviously live every Thursday evening from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or you can download the app for your smartphone and check us out that way. And actually, it's on TuneIn Radio. It's on a couple of the other little, radio shows where you can listen to not only Just Energy Radio, but some of the other great programming that's here on Inception Radio. Couple of events coming up on September 21st in El Reno, Oklahoma. Only Oklahoma and Arkansas have these weird names. El Reno, Oklahoma is the Paranormal Times Paracon. It is September 21st and 22nd. I'll be there speaking, doing session work. It has a really great lineup. The information about it is at paranormaltimesmag.com. I am just so prepared. Yeah, just look it up. It's on the webpage under the upcoming events if you want some more information. Also, a good friend of mine is hosting the Ancient Mysteries Conference the same weekend in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And that's the ancientmysteryconference.com. Let's see, coming up, History, Haunts, and Legend Conference in spooky Jefferson, Texas. One of my favorite events to go to because it's just so much fun because Jefferson is spooky. And if you've listened to the show, you've heard me talk about Jefferson every year because it's just fun. Anyway, that's all of my announcements for now. I am working on some really cool stuff for 2014. It's just so weird that you have to start planning and organizing things that you want to do months and months and months in advance that, it's even hard to wrap your mind to talk about them. Anyway, but that'll be coming up, and as soon as I have more information, I will pass that along to you. So let me tell you a little bit about our first hour's guest, Shannon Dorey, and get her on the air. Shannon Dorey is a graduate of Trent University in Peterborough, Ontario, where she first became immersed in the study of history and mythology. She began her writing career as a journalist and first began research on the Dogon in 1999. Realizing the importance of the symbolism in the Dogon religion, Dorey has devoted most of her time to researching and writing about this subject. So, the author of Master of Speech, which is the book we're going to be talking about today, Shannon Dorey. Hey, Shannon, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm great, and I'm so glad to get you on the show. I read your book, Master of Speech, and I was just like, man, I only get you for an hour because it was just so jam-packed with information that was all very cool. So let's start here. I mean, since you're new to the show, I always like to kind of get a little information about who you are and how you became interested in history and mythology and the Dogon in particular.
Well, my interest in ufology actually was fostered by my father, who had been a lawyer for the Canadian Air Force, and he had been stationed at Saint-Hubert, Quebec, which is the home of the Canadian Space Agency. And he started taking an interest in aliens and UFOs, and this sort of rubbed off on me. And I believe he must have seen something in the course of his work that led him to believe that aliens were real, because he had been raised a strict Catholic. So I don't think this is something he would have, gotten to on his own. And so this is sort of how I got interested in ufology. My interest in religious studies came about as a result of a course I had taken with Dr. Christian Kelm at the University of Windsor. And it was on the New Testament, and it was at this time that I realized I had a gift for seeing symbols in biblical passages that other people would miss. And he tried to encourage me to go into religious studies at that time, but it wasn't feasible for me to do it. And I took a job teaching English as a second language, English literature and grammar. And it wasn't until 1999 when I read about the Dogon online that I was interested in their cosmology, because it talks about alien beings and the fact that they gave them advanced knowledge of the solar system. And I was interested, so I ordered Marcel Griot's book. And it's called Conversations with Olga Tameli. That's the English translation. And it was first published in 1948. And I just want to give you a little background about Marcel Griot, the French anthropologist who wrote the book. He had first come across the Dogon in the 1930s, and when he was on a field expedition in Africa, and he realized how primitive this religion was, and he described it as being the most backward race in the whole region and the best example of primitive savagery known to the world at that time. These are his words. And he describes how the religion was so ancient that even Muslim Africans couldn't understand it any better than the Europeans could. And he realized how important this was, and he went back to Africa and lived amongst the Dogon people for 15 years trying to understand their religion. And the Dogon religion is very much a mystery religion, and they did not give the information easily to him. They were very evasive about questions, and it wasn't until after they'd had several run-ins with the French authorities that they probably realized they weren't going to be able to practice this religion much longer, and they decided to let Marcel Griot in on these innermost symbols of the religion. And it was taught to him by Olga Tameli, who was blind. He had been one-eyed from childhood, and he became blind later in life as a result of an accident. So he's the one who sat down with Marcel Griot in 1946 and told him these stories that Marcel Griot recorded. And for the most part, Marcel Griot recorded the religion accurately, but one grave error he made was that he identified the Nummo as male deities, when in fact they were female deities, and they were symbolized by the sun, which was a female symbol. And he lived in a very patriarchal culture, so it's not surprising that he referred to them as males. It isn't until you get to the end of Conversations with Olga Tameli, and at the back there's a table there, and here we have the main characters of the religion, who he identifies as male throughout the book, as being identified as females finally. And the significance of this is great because the earliest religions in the world were matriarchal religions. So this is a matriarchal religion, and it shows how old it is. And by incorrectly identifying the sexes, we lose that. And it's unfortunate because I think other researchers would have, like Maria Gamboudas, for instance, would have been fascinated by this mythology if they'd known about it. So we have this wonderful record, and the most important thing about this is that it was the Dogon were living in an oral culture when it was recorded, and they were still living in this oral culture, and they had never changed. Writing had never become a part of it. So we've got these stories that have been passed on from generation to generation, and it's a wonderful document. In all my years of studying English literature, I've never come across a document with so many symbols in it. There's just layer upon layer of symbolism.
And what do you mean? You made the comment earlier that you were able to see symbols in religious texts, and now you're talking about, symbols as part of this cultural basis. What do you mean by that?
Well, if you look at the written literature, for instance, to give you an example how different the oral culture is from a written culture, we read a document and it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and basically what you see is what you get, and this isn't how the oral religion is structured. It's every word has a meaning, it means something else. So when you read a symbol, it's got all these other things associated with them. It's just not a word at face value, and it's the thing that holds the structure of this together is the relationship between the symbols, and it's almost similar to what you would see, like we're heading into a digital culture now where, you read a document on the internet and you hit a link. And so you hit that link, you go to another document, and you may not go back to the first document. You may go to another document. So nothing is really linear the way it is in a written culture, where you start with the document and you finish with the same document. And the oral culture is the same way. You'll read along, and then you hit one of these symbols, these key symbols of the religion, and all of a sudden it brings in all these things that are associated with that symbol. So you're drawing information from different areas. So you can't just read this document at face value. And I think this is what a lot of other people have done, and you just lose it when you do that, because it wasn't meant to be read like a book. It's an oral tradition that's meant to be told and studied in an oral setting.
And correct me if this is incorrect. I mean, I don't want to say recently, but fairly recently read the Ramayana, and one of the things that is in there is they talk about, Rama is from this line and this person is from this lineage. But if you don't really understand what the meaning of that lineage is, there's a whole aspect that you lose. So, for example, one of the things that I discovered after reading it was, it talks about the Vanar, who are these monkeys, these half men, they're half man, half god monkeys, but if you didn't know that was what the Vanar were, it would just be totally lost. In the meaning of the whole story. And you would just think, well, it's this group of guys and not these, demi-monkeys.
That's one of the wonderful things about this religion, is that it was recorded in modern times in a language that we understand. Right from a Dogon elder. From a historical perspective, it doesn't get much better than that. I mean, you're not trying to piece together fragments of different things that you happen to discover. And one thing I've noticed about this document is it's held together like a circle, it's you've got to have the whole thing to understand all the pieces, if you know what I'm trying to say here, rather than just a fragment of something. So I think we've really we think we're piecing history together when we look back, but what I've learned from what I've done with the Dogon religion is that you can't. It's hard, very difficult to do that, because if you don't have the pieces, like Marcel Griol never understood the Dogon religion because he didn't understand, like a key symbol of the Dogon religion is the word. And the word is a symbol of DNA. Well, DNA wasn't discovered until 1953, and Marcel Grill died in 1956. So he never really did understand the religion because he didn't understand this one key symbol. And this is such an important part of the whole thing. It's like for me, it was the beginning symbol that got me rolling on the rest of it. And he describes, Ogatameli teaches this symbol as a fiber skirt, that he describes the Nummo bringing down these 10 fibers to the earth, and they take these 10 fibers and they make it into a what they call a fiber skirt. And there's one strand for the front and one strand for the back. And Ogatameli describes how these strands are the essence of the Nummo, and they hang in coils. And he talks about broken lines and this, like the words he's describing are familiar pictures of DNA with the helix and the hydrogen bonds, like broken lines in between the two strands. And this was such an important image in the Dogon culture that masked men would wear these long tendrils hanging down to their feet, even in Marcel Grill's day. And they described this fiber skirt being placed over the Earth's genitalia. And this is the essence of the Nummo that's becoming a part of humanity. And so when they place this fiber skirt over the earth and create these new beings and create new life, it's the beginning of the word. It's the first word that occurs on earth. And they describe how the earth animals are able to speak as a result of having the Nummo's DNA combined with their DNA. And so you have the symbol of the fiber skirt being associated with the symbol of the word. And Ogatameli explains that to be naked is to be speechless. And of course, we see the same symbolism in the biblical passage in Genesis with Adam and Eve, and they eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge, and they gain intelligence. And they realize they're naked, and we get this image of the clothing as being associated with the word, and the serpent is the one who tells them to eat the fruit. And of course, Joseph Campbell discusses this passage in his book Mass of God, and he says that there's no mention in the Bible that the serpent who spoke to Eve had been revered in the Eastern Mediterranean for 7,000 years before the composition of the book of Genesis. And of course, the Nummo are referred to as serpents. That is the word that Ogatameli most often uses. They were amphibians, but they had fish tails, but they moved like serpents on the land, so he described them as being serpents. So a lot of the imagery that you get and descriptions of the Nummo are the same symbols that you see Maria Gimbutas talk about in reference to the goddess religion of old Europe. And some of these images go back to the Neolithic period, which is 10,200 BC that we're talking. And the Nummo were amphibians, so you see them being associated with frog goddesses in these other ancient cultures. Like in Egyptian, for instance, the Heket is the frog goddess. And you see the Greek goddess Artemis being worshipped as a toad in Italy and Lithuania. And Maria Gimbutas talked about the Sheilas that appear in medieval churches, and they're the frog goddess, and that she says came from the Neolithic period. And so we see the Nummo, because they're amphibians, being associated with these other amphibians in earlier cultures. And they also had a horn on their head. Ogatameli described this horn as being like a stalk of corn, that the horn fits into the Nummo's hood in the same way that a stalk of corn fits into its husk. And, they were green. They had green skin, and the skin shimmered like the rainbow sometimes. And they had slanted eyes, and when I was doing research for the Master of Speech, I came across the figurines and that are, Ur was where modern Iraq is today, and these date back to 4500 BC, and they just look exactly the way Ogatamala described the Nummo. One interesting aspect of these statues is that they have these lines on their bellies, and the Dogon women would mimic the appearance of the Nummo in their jewelry and tattoos, and they had these tattoos on their abdomens that went from below their breasts to their navel, and they were in a series of lines and V's without points, and these statues have these same lines on them. The women would wear a ring on their baby finger, their ring finger, and their first finger, because on the Nummo they would have these bumps protruding from their hands on these particular fingers. The Nummo had these bumps coming out of their elbows and wrists, and so the women would wear armbands on their wrists and elbows.
To make them look more godlike?
Yeah, well, to mimic the Nummo, mimic their appearance, and probably so they would remember how they looked. They also described them having this iron sandal. Because the Nummo only had a tail, they didn't have two legs like humans. They were perceived as having one leg. And this is a really important symbol that appears in a lot of ancient cultures. And they had this device that they used that Ogatamala referred to as an iron sandal that would help them fly over the land. And and apparently the priests would try to mimic the Nummo, and they'd put on two iron sandals that lay on the altar, and the Nummo finally convinced them to use leather, that it was easier for walking. And you see the Nummo with they're associated with the ram. When they're in their spaceships, they're identified as celestial rams, and this is because the spaceship glows in a red ball. But it has these.
Well, let's come back to that. Because that's.
Sure.
I got other questions, but we're going to go there.
Okay. Yep. That's fine.
Don't worry, we're going there.
That's fine.
You mentioned earlier that Groulet had some issues wrapping his mind around this religion, and you made the commentary about, that he was so patriarchal and, coming from a male-dominated world, which I can understand, that aspect. But it seems to me if we're talking about, which it looks like we're going to, extraterrestrials and these alien beings that are amphibious snake-like beings hanging around on the earth, I could see, and we're talking about like before the 1950s science fiction movies with, flying saucers coming down, that he wouldn't really even have a concept per se of life off of the earth, and the possibility that there could be something outside of what we see today.
Absolutely. The thoughts that this would be the source of Christianity, for instance, which my research shows that it is, would never have entered his head. He wouldn't have even associated intelligence with beings like the Nummo, these serpent beings. That's another reason that supports the fact that these beings were probably real, is because they weren't human-like at all. If they had come from the human imagination, they probably would have been more human-like, and so he wouldn't have attributed them to being, from space, probably.
So where did they come from?
Did
they ever tell?
The Nummo themselves, I believe they came from Mars. A lot of people think they came from Sirius because the Sigu festival in the Dogon society is associated with Sirius A and Sirius B. But just getting back to in order to explain this, I just have to give you a little background. When they have this first experiment with this first word that I was talking about earlier, the experiment fails, and just like in biblical mythology, they become intelligent, but they lose their immortality. The Nummo were supposed to be immortal beings, and they were always conscious and present. And when they died, it was just like a snake shedding its skin, and they were always there. So when they combine their DNA with the earth animals, and there's the sense that they came to Earth in the first place because their world was dying and they needed somewhere else to live. And so they combine their DNA with the animals, and the first experiment, which is the first word, fails. And you get this sense that, and when it fails, the reason it fails is because the Nummo are self-fertilizing hermaphrodites, and I associate them with the self-fertilizing killifish, because I believe the Nummo procreated the same way. And 85% of the time, these little killifish are born self-fertilizing hermaphrodites like the Nummo were. But then 15% of the time, a single-sexed male is born, and this male provides genetic diversity to their species. But when they combined their DNA with the earth, the females who were born were all hermaphrodites. They were immortal. They were like the Nummo. But when one of these males was born, these single-sex males was born, he was born mortal and severed from the Nummo's spiritual essence. And he is considered the first human. And he's male, so that's how you get this symbolism with the male being the evil in the religion and the Nummo being the female, the divine feminine. And even though they were actually hermaphrodites, but they're considered the mother of the earth. And anyway, I'm sorry, I've sort of got off track here. We were talking. What was the question you were asking me?
Well, initially? It had started with, his. Oh, where did they come from? Sorry, where did they come from?
Oh, right. Okay, so after this experiment fails, this jackal figure, there's these males and they rebel against the Nummo, and they end up destroying the Earth. They steal one of the Nummo spaceships. They crash it into the Earth. They create a worldwide devastation. And so the Nummo leave the Earth and they head to the Pleiades star system. And that's where they create a second experiment. And it's from the Pleiades that they return to Earth. The 8 ancestors return to Earth. But the Nummo themselves, I believe they came from our own solar system. And that because a lot of the symbolism associated with the Nummo, they were symbolized by copper, and Mars was associated with copper in the Dogon religion. It was associated with the placenta, and so there's a lot of imagery that points to Mars as being their home planet. What happens is that there's a red giant star that apparently is in the solar system at that time, and it expands out and destroys the life on Mars. And they try to prevent this from happening somehow, and there's some kind of failed experiment. And our sun, this sun that was the son of Mars and the Nummo sun, ends up becoming Sirius B. So they associate Sirius B with the failed experiment, with the jackal, with males. And the Sigu festival in the Dogon religion is about Sirius, and it's really about Sirius B and our lost son, because this creates all kinds of spiritual problems on the earth. And so it's a male society, and they talk about the beginning of humanity during funerals because it's about death in humanity. And the language of the Sigu only has a quarter of the words that the main language, the Dogo So, has. And this is in reference to the word and the defective DNA. We get this symbol of the word again. And if you think about language and alphabets and how we use words like COW means cow and DOG means dog, and you take all these letters and you mix them up to create different words. Well, this is the same way that DNA is. You use different variations of DNA to create animals, plants, or humans, and words with the same root have similar meanings in the same way that animals or plants with the same genome have similar characteristics. So the word is a very important symbol in the Dogon religion, and it's the word is an important symbol in other ancient cultures. You see it in biblical mythology with the book of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word became flesh and made its dwelling among us. Well, if you think of the Word as a symbol for DNA, then it fits perfectly with that passage. You see the word in Gnosticism and a lot of other different scripts, but the Sigu Society was about this failed experiment, and because they talk about Sirius, and the first time they hold it is with the helical rising of Sirius, so that the sun, our sun, and Sirius are lined up, and so to them that means the meeting of the two suns, which is brings us back to before this all happened, when we had two suns in our system.
But it's not making me feel very good if we're like the remnant of some botched experiment.
Yeah, well, I know, but there is hope. I mean, they do several experiments, and the last one is supposed to, bring all the order back into the solar system, and bring all nature into harmony. And
okay, well, I don't know that I'll hold my breath on that today.
yeah,
But I did have a question, but it left.
I know,
but kind of keeping in line with this. How far back do you think their presence came here? I mean, there are a lot of people that think that, and I'm just going to say alien intervention, and I'm just going to use that in a very generic way. It was like 40,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago. One of the things that I proposed in my book was that they were here and there was not really anything on the planet, and they were the prime motivators for life to be created on the Earth. What's your feeling?
Well, I agree with you. We're talking billions of years ago.
I'm loving you better, Shannon.
Well, I don't know if you last week it came out that all life was supposed to have been created on from Mars that exists on the Earth. That scientists now believe that 3 billion years ago there wasn't the right elements on the Earth for life to develop. So now they believe all life came from Mars, and they figure it came on a meteorite. Well, the Dogon tell us that the Nummo brought life to the Earth. So, but we're talking
when you look at different texts, and it talks about the semi-dark world, and then they have a little war, and a bunch of people get ejected. And one of the things that you find in Vedic material is that these two guys stole the Vedas, the knowledge of creation, and took off with it. And my feeling is that was the information, as you're saying, like the word that gave them the information to create life.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that, because in the Dogon religion, there's the 8 ancestors that are in the Pleiades star system. They're able to maintain their immortality as long as procreation is controlled. And the first 4 ancestors are all male, and the latter 4 are all female. And the person who has the best combination of Nummo and human DNA is the mistress of speech, or the master of speech, which is the name of my first book, but she's actually a female character. And she can only mate with the second ancestor, who has the DNA that's most closely related to the jackal. And everything's fine in the Pleiades as long as procreation is controlled. But what happens is that the first 2 male ancestors have an affair, and one of them gets pregnant. They're hermaphrodites, but they're primarily male and associated with the Earth. And this is really serious for the Nummo, because their own immortality is jeopardized by this. So Ogatamali wasn't sure whether they were told to leave the Nummo's world or if they fled, maybe to protect the life of this unborn child, but they come back to Earth. And this is associated with the stolen word and the stolen DNA, and they're both male deities, and they have this child, and of course the other 6 ancestors end up coming back with them, and then that's when you get the third word created, which is the 7th and 8th ancestors creating this the figure of Lebe, who is Ogatamali says is a new word created by 2 females. So Lebe is the exact opposite genetic composition as as the male, the child of the two males, and
Was
I really
it single sexed, or was it hermaphroditic,
no,
androgynous
they were.
also?
Yeah, they were all. I don't know about the child. Lebe was a hermaphrodite, but 5 generations after her birth, humans became single sex beings, and because they removed some of their DNA from humans when this episode happens, because the Nummo are afraid for their own immortality. And I really believe that the child of these two males is Merove, who is the ancestors of the Merovingians. And the reason I say that is because myths about Merove say that he was the child born of two fathers. His ancestry is associated with Nephilim, who are fallen angels. He's supposed to be the offspring of aliens. One of his fathers was a sea creature, and you see all these things that they talk about relate to the Dogon religion, and these two males who left the Nummo's world, and essentially this child is associated with the stolen word or the stolen DNA.
See, now I have to get their book and read the whole thing. I only read like one chapter out of it, or read yours, or because this is just so fascinating. You know, one of the things that I feel is very important when doing this kind of research is finding material that is as close to source as you can. And there are so many cultures like the Dogon, like the Aborigine in Australia, that, you know, there was nothing documented until the late 1800s, early 1900s, you know, about their religion, about their mythology, and about their culture. You know, so I think there's so much that's missing, but it's the only record we have.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Australia, I have an article on my website about the rainbow serpent. I mean, that's their big thing over there, and the Nummo were serpents, and they were associated with the rainbow. When their spaceship was going through the sky, it left a track of 4 colors that looked like a rainbow. And there's I describe incidents in the mythology that are very similar to what we get in Australian Aboriginal mythology. Especially in relation to circumcision, which in the Dogon religion is associated with humans losing their androgyny and immortality, and it's seen sort of as a fix in the sense that the Nummo remove some of their DNA from humanity in the hope that they'll eventually evolve back into immortal beings. And as the DNA from these two figures, Merove and Lebe, mingle, and eventually they were hoping that this would correct the problem. And you have this image of the mistress of speech who has the perfect DNA combination, and she circumcises the jackal with her teeth, and this sounds crazy, but these are all symbols. The teeth are a symbol that appears at the entrance of the Nummo spaceship, and the spaceship is kept underground. So from the surface of the ground, it looks like a giant anthill, and we have this opening in this spaceship with these teeth in it, and it looks like a giant mouth. And one story in the mythology talks about how the mistress of speech teaches weaving to humanity. So she uses these teeth, and Ogatamela describes the clacking of the shuttle and the creaking of the block as she's teaching weaving to humanity. And the weaving is a symbol of, it's associated with the fibrous skirt from the first word. And so her DNA is being woven into the genetic fabric of humanity, and Ogatamela explains that really it's the creaking of the word, and the word symbol again with its relationship to DNA, and she's the master of speech. You know, you get these connection with these different word symbols, and anyway, the weaving is a very important part of her, and of course, sorry. Yeah, mm-hmm.
Well, and I think it's interesting that in a lot of Native American cultures, they talk about the mother goddess being a spider, and she weaves the world with her web.
Exactly.
But
and
let's go ahead.
I was just going to say the spider is also a symbol. The scorpion is a symbol of the Nummo in the Dogon religion as well.
Bugs. Ugh. And I'm going to kind of change topic here a little bit, but you described the Nummo as being green in appearance. Do you think there's a relationship to the modern day quote unquote reptilians that we hear so much about?
There may very well be. Ogatameli referred to them as reptiles in some passages. They lived underground. The sunlight, they indicate that the sunlight could have bothered their skin, and they lived in water. That's why the spaceship was underground, because we see this with other amphibians like long-toed salamanders, where the sunlight is very harmful to them, and so they may have been that way as well. The Nummo themselves look lizard-like, but the 8 ancestors who come back from the Pleiades, they have a human upper body and a fish-tailed lower body. They're more like mermaids and mermen, and you see this in ancient with Dogon, the appearing on amphoras with breasts and fishtail and beard, showing his androgynous nature. And so, yes, I think they could very well be associated with these figures that people describe. The Nummo were benevolent beings, though. Everything about them, they were considered good. And you get the evil coming in when you see the reversal of the symbols. Joseph Campbell talks about this. The sun symbol is a symbol of the Nummo and the goddess, and then you get these warring tribes who come down and conquer these matriarchal religions, and they don't like the fact that the male is evil in the religion, so they reverse all the symbols. And Joseph Campbell called this solarization and the birth of the Sun King. And so all these symbols from the earlier religion become reversed, and you have this figure of the serpent as evil and the devil. And so I guess I have a problem when I hear people associating these figures with evil, because they look like what we've been told are evil figures, when in fact they're not, according to the Dogon.
Brainwashing. Total brainwashing. I know, and I agree with you 100%, because when you look at myths around the world, it is always these aquatic, amphibious, reptilian creatures that were the genetic engineers. They taught mankind. They were always very beneficial toward mankind. And it's like, well, where did the evil part come from? I just don't make the connection personally, unless it was somebody else doing it and saying, oh, they're bad. But from their own nature, I don't get it.
Well, I think a lot of it comes from Catholicism. I know when Marcel Griol was doing his research, he came across a figure on the pediment of a tomb, and it's the smith's hammer and anvil, and it's in the shape of a cross. The top of the serpent's head is the top of the cross, and the outstretched arms are the sides of the cross, and then the tail of the serpent goes into the anvil on the bottom. And this hammer and anvil together are a symbol of the Nummo. The top is the male, and the anvil is the female. And when Marcel Griol saw this on this tomb, it really upset him, and he had many sleepless nights about this, because he was concerned, because this was he referred to it as the anvil Christ. And so my research shows that this symbol came down to us through Christianity as the Christian cross, only you never see the anvil. You rarely see the anvil, but it there's in my last book, Day of the Fish, there's a picture from the Glazier Codex, and it's this wonderful picture of a cross on top of an anvil, and it's an Ankh cross. And it's a 3rd, 4th century document of the New Testament in Coptic. And the cross has weaving through it, which is associated with the mistress of speech. At the very top, there's a rooster, and it's an Ankh cross, so it's a circular. So you've got this rooster image, and the rooster was a symbol of the jackal in the Dogon religion. You have peacocks on either side, and dual birds, and dual birds I talk about a lot in my research because I believe it symbolizes the androgynous Nummo. They were identified as twins in the Dogon religion, and you often see these dual birds appearing in artifacts associated with them. So we have this image of the cross on top of the anvil, which is very rare because they try to stamp out anything associated with the divine feminine, because the Nummo were feminine beings, and the mistress of speech, who my research shows later became the Christ figure of Christianity, was a female deity. She was a hermaphrodite, but she was female.
Oops. And I'm going to go back to the alien thing for a second.
Sure.
But in a slightly different way. Because mythology suggests that multiple races of God, at least that's the way I like looking at them, lived here on Earth. There were the serpent, fish-like gods, but then it seems like there were other, I can only say intergalactic or different races of these extraterrestrials. Does any of that reflect in Dogon cosmology?
The image of the bird may, because, and I talk about this more in my second book, the birds are what is left over from the dinosaurs. And, that's the only remnant of dinosaurs we have existing today is apparently found in birds. And the Nummo had gizzards, and the mistress of speech was associated with the bird, the Donu bird, in some passages. So they may be associated with birds, and you do see bird deities appearing on artifacts in conjunction with the serpent, the fish-tailed beings that the Nummo were. So it could bird figurines, but the Dogon do also talk about other worlds and how there is life on other worlds, and that there's crawling creatures and there's insect creatures, and they try to explain this.
Okay, so it does sound like they were aware of, life other. Well, I mean, and I'm just going to put in, on a side note, there are people that talk about the Anunnaki like they were the only guys in the galaxy, and I mean, when people use that term, I tend to kind of go, well, are we talking about a blanket term, or are we talking about one specific group? And it sounds like with the Nummo, we're talking about one specific group, based on what they look like. But it sounds like they were aware that there were other people, other groups there, but just not here on Earth.
Right.
Cool. I like that.
Yeah, the Dogon religion is extremely ancient. We see the Nummo are also symbolized by the cow. And the word sun, because they were symbolized by the sun, was ne, and the word for cow was na, and the word for mother was na, or something. They all had the same root, so they were all
connected. About the cow.
Well,
I keep running into the cow, and for the life of me, I cannot really figure out why a cow.
Well, the cow. The cow was just a symbol of the Nummo, and because they talk about the red and white cows, and the mistress of speech and the Nummo are associated with the red cow, and the jackal associated with the white cow of death, and the cow appears in Egyptian mythology, where you have Neith as the cow of heaven, and she's associated with the ocean, and she's supposed to be self-generating. She's the first deity, and she's considered the feminine of the Evanimous, the jackal-headed god of Upper Egypt, and this is the jackal that the same jackal the Dogon talk about. She appears with the sun disk, and she's considered an earlier version of Isis. And her name, according to Kenneth MacLeish, is in the shape of a weaving shuttle. So this really associates her with the mistress of speech, who teaches weaving, and her genetic inheritance is woven into humanity. And we see Isis appearing as a serpent in some statues, and she appears as a cow with cow horns and a sun disk, and then we see the goddess Hathor appearing as a cow with the sun disk between her horns. And there's a wonderful picture in the papyrus of Annie where she's shown as a cow and she emerges through these papyrus plants. Well, the papyrus plant is significant because it's a symbol. It's how they make paper, and this is what the word is written on. And we see the cows appearing in the watermarks of the Albigensians with the cow horns. And the Albigensians were the people will know them as the Cathars. They lived in the south of France, and they were highly educated. They were one of the cultural centers of Europe at the time, and the Roman Catholic Church didn't like the fact that they weren't practicing Catholicism. So they have one of the Crusades attack this area of France in 1209, and it's considered the first genocide of a people in modern times. And there's one story where all these people are hiding in the church, and the soldier goes up to the papal legate and he says, "Well, what do we do? There's Christians and amongst them." He says, "Burn them all. God will recognize his own." So we have these people, these Albigensians, who are persecuted for 300 years or so, and those who survive flee to other countries. And apparently some of them had been paper makers at some point, and they teach their paper making skills to the people that they encounter in their adopted countries. And then they embed the symbols of their religion in the paper in the form of watermarks when they print the literature, the popular literature of the era. And this goes on for several centuries. And these symbols are the same symbols that we find in the Dogon religion. And the significance of this is that we're dealing with paper, and this is the word, and these images are the symbols of their religion, and they're in the form of watermarks. These things are all related, and we see the hammer and the anvil in these symbols as well. We see the mermaid.
Let me ask, I don't mean to jump, but I'm just looking at the clock, and there was a question in the chat room, and this is from Lisa, and it says, and I'm just going to read it how it says it. Are the Nummo not related to the Anunnaki? And then it says, because maybe male-dominated Anunnaki were the patriarchal types that pushed out female religions.
Yes, I agree with that. That they did push out. That's why the matriarchal religions are the earliest religions, and that's why anything that comes after that, where you have a male god, it's humans taking control of these earlier religions and fitting it to their own. They want to control. They want power, and you see these males. Joseph Campbell talks about how these traditions, these patriarchal warring tribes, our traditions have come down to us in Judaism, Christianity, and the Roman and Greek myths. And even the Dogon themselves had fled their original homeland in sometime between the 11th and 13th century because of their refusal to convert to Islam. So you see all these religions who have tried to stamp out this earlier religion because it identifies the female as the the divine feminine.
But one of the things about Joseph Campbell's work, I mean, he definitely is a great researcher, but his belief, as far as I understand, has been that all of these stories that come out of mythology are just archetypes and not fact-based. You know, what do you have to say to somebody that makes that commentary?
Well, I know one thing that he mentions is that he wished Maria Gimbutas's work had been around before he wrote his books, but her work came after. Maybe he would have had a different spin on it. He was also quite Catholic, I think, and this could have been coming from his Catholic background. I don't know. A lot of historians look at things like that they can't understand, and they put it down to myth. We see that earlier I was talking about the Smith's hammer. Well, the Smith's hammer is what becomes the witch's hammer, and we see this in the witch trials where Malus Maleficarium is the name of the witch hunter's manual that they use for 300 years, and the name of it is the witch's hammer, and this is the hammer that is associated with this pagan religion. And Margaret Murray had interviewed a lot of these witches who had been convicted of witchcraft, and they all went to their death claiming that theirs was the true religion and witchcraft was, and Catholicism was false. And they said that, and Margaret Murray said that she believed this religion existed, and I believe this religion did exist all over Europe, and it was the same religion the Dogon believed. And she talked about how these women had worshipped a horned deity. And there's the Canon Episcopal, a 10th century document, talks about how women had met at night to meet with the Greek who they associated with the Greek goddess Diana, and they would go on rides on these beasts across great expanses of the earth, and the people who are recording it, put it down to their fantasy, and I'm wondering if they went on the Nummo spaceship because the Dogon associated their spaceship with celestial rams, and so these women talk about this procession and how they meet them at night. Well, this is because the Nummo moved about at night. The sunlight was harmful to their skin. So you see a lot of these things appearing in the past, and even modern historians today don't, they don't think this religion ever existed in Europe. They think that Margaret Murray's research was false because they can't believe that this religion existed. They think that the witch trials were just vindictive and that there was no religion existing.
Well, I would love to keep going on this topic because I knew that an hour would not be enough. But I'm just glad I got you for an hour because you're definitely going to come back because there's so much more for us to talk about. But our time is running out. So if you want to get a copy of your book or if you have any, presentations or anything coming up, if you want to just take the time to share it.
Sure. I don't have anything at the moment, but you can find information on my books on my website, shannondorey.com. And I have a lot of articles on that website, too, that you may be interested in, especially about the cow symbolism. There's the Australian rainbow serpent. And I also talk about some of the things that happen in the solar system with Mars and red giants and things like that you may be interested in.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been excellent.
Well, thanks for having me.
And, we'll get you scheduled to come back on to talk about one of your other books because we pretty much, I don't know how much, we covered part of Master of Speech. I'm not sure how far off topic we really got, but it was all good. So it's all good. All right, Shannon, I'm going to let you go, and I will talk to you again soon.
Okay, thank you. Bye now.
Okay, thank you. And that's Shannon Dorey. Her book that we tried to talk about tonight was Master of Speech, but I'm sure we covered stuff in her other books. Her webpage is www.shannondorey.com, and we'll be back with Alex Triplish after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.
You're listening to IRN, the Inception Radio Network, Chicago, Illinois.
Move past the crossroads in your life and discover alternative solutions to your deepest concerns at soulhealer.com. So whether it's a physical problem, an emotional issue, a question about work, or troubles in your relationships, naturopath and medical intuitive Dr. Rita Louise can help you. Bring peace, harmony, and health back into your life. Schedule a session today. Visit soulhealer.com right away and live the life you've been dreaming of.
Hi, Bob Tarmac for MJ'sHealthyWay.com. Are you into vitamins, nutrition, meal replacements, health shakes, keeping your body in good shape, your internal engine going? Boy, do I have a perfect place for you. MJ'sHealthyWay.com. They offer the best service and products, and they'll tell you anything you need to know about any product they have to offer. I get all my vitamins, meal replacements, shakes from MJ'sHealthyWay.com. That's spelled MJSHealthyWay.com. There's so much more at the website. Go check it out. MJ'sHealthyWay.com.
Go deep inside yourself and venture into the realm of the unconscious mind with my Meditating on the Kabbalah guided imagery audio CDs. Discover who you are and what you want in life. Meditating on the Kabbalah can help you to open, clear, and revitalize the energetic pathways of your subtle being. They will support you in your spiritual quest by helping you to access the profound insights and inner guidance you need as you work in alignment with your highest good. Let them help you to release negative thoughts and emotions and clear away any limitations that may be keeping you from experiencing your full potential. Walk down the path to health, healing, understanding, and enlightenment with Meditating on the Kabbalah. Order your copy today at www.soulhealer.com. That's right, that's www.soulhealer.com.
Looking for a cure for boredom? Never worry, IRN's interactive website introduces a number of ways to pass time while you listen to your favorite show. Choose anything from the IRN Chat Lounge, Game Lounge, Video Lounge, or the Mood Lounge. These fun, exciting features let you chat in real time with fellow listeners, view live skywatches, play daily posted online games, or pick a show based on topic. The choices are endless, so use your time wisely by keeping it all on IRN.
Don't have a computer? Is your internet connection down? Don't worry. Use your trusty landline or cell phone and dial our call and listen lines at 832-280-0830 or 786-837-2262 to listen to the Inception Radio Network 24/7. Again, those numbers are 832-280-0830 or 786-837-2262. For the Inception Radio Network, I'm MJ.
Are you sensitive to energy? Want to explore the world beyond the five senses? Looking for a new career as an alternative healthcare practitioner? Then the Institute of Applied Energetics, Medical Intuition, and Energy Medicine training programs may be right for you. Our comprehensive curriculum provides students with a deep understanding of how to detect, evaluate, and transform the subtle body, as well as techniques for correcting energetic imbalances that may underscore a person's ability to experience radiant health. So if you are sensitive to energy, contact the Institute of Applied Energetics right away. Be a catalyst for changing the way healthcare is done around the world. Visit www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com and start your new career today.
Hello, Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Remember, you can take your Inception Radio shows on the go. Just download the Inception Radio Network app for your iPhone, iPad, or Android smartphones and access live shows, past shows, guest lineups, and much more. Just visit the iTunes Store or the Google Play Marketplace and download it today for free.
And now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. In this hour, we're going to be speaking with Alex Treplish about his graphic novel, In the Beginning, the Epic of the Anunnaki. But don't forget, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com and the Institute of Applied Energetics, where you can learn to become a medical intuitive counselor, or energy medicine practitioner. And don't forget, stop by the Just Energy Radio webpage, www.justenergyradio.com, and sign up for our weekly newsletter or check out our show archives. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Alex and get him on the air. Alex Treplish was born in Odessa, Ukraine, which is formerly part of the USSR. I have this very long bio, and I'm just trying to cut through. Since an early age, he has had an inquiring mind and took great liking and interest in science and all things related: astronomy, extraterrestrial life, science fiction, and comics. And now Alex has released his new graphic novel, which we're going to find out about why a graphic novel, In the Beginning, the Epic of the Anunnaki. And his webpage is www.inthebeginningthebook.com. So please welcome Alex Treplish. Hey, Alex, how are you?
Hi, how are you?
I'm
Thank
good.
you for having me.
Did I say your last name right?
It's actually Teplish. T-E-P.
Oh, yeah, there's no R in there, is there?
Yeah,
See,
that's all right.
It's dyslexia at work.
No problem.
You're not the first. You just add it to the list of bad pronunciation. Anyway, so you have this graphic novel about the Anunnaki, and I'm going to ask, why did you decide to write this? And then, kind of part of that, why did you decide to do it in a graphic novel format versus doing a book on the topic? I mean, because it's a really different medium.
Yep. So I've been interested in this subject just the Anunnaki alone for about 15 years, if not more. I read a lot of books by Zecharia Sitchin, Eric von Daniken, many others. And basically, after reading all these books, I learned a lot about the subject. I researched more on my own on the internet. And no matter how much I would read about it and how believable it would be, no matter who else I would speak to, they either never heard of it or they found it completely unbelievable. So I tried to hand off some of these books that I had in my possession to some of my friends, and some of them read it and found it very interesting, while others found it difficult to read, very detailed about the various aspects of the theories, but there was no real story to it. So that kind of led me to the idea of this would be great to be a movie to teach people about this other alternative retelling of our past, of our ancient history. So I originally wrote a screenplay, which I then decided to convert into a graphic novel because that was just more of for me, it was an easier approach to get this project done and have it out in the public.
I mean, I think it's pretty cool. I think that, other than, I'm a very visual person, so having the pictures to kind of go along with the story and, whoever your artist, which I don't have his name in front of me, it's got some good art in that pup. So, I think that that's really cool. But I think in today's society, there are a lot more people that are going to be drawn to that medium and that format versus reading some dry, boring textbook kind of book. I mean, I enjoy reading those kind of books, but I'm kind of, one of those weird people that like reading those kind of books.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I love reading those kinds of books too. Majority of the books I've read are nonfiction. 'Cause I like to learn and I like to get something out of every book I read. And I don't discount those books at all. I mean, I definitely recommend to everyone who's interested to go out and get some of these books and read about the details of the subject, the actual theories. But what I wanted to do with my book was create a visual depiction of how the story may have taken place, the characters involved, and I also connected it to the Book of Genesis, the stories from the Book of Genesis.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that part. We're definitely going to get to that part. And so you mentioned a couple of sources, but, Zachariah Sitchin, Eric von Däniken, what are some of the other sources that you drew? Well, obviously the Bible, but that you drew information from? Or is it just from years of investigation and research?
Well, no. I actually read a bunch of books. I mean, I read pretty much all of Zachariah Sitchin's books, a whole bunch of Eric von Däniken's books. There's some other books I'd recommend. And at the end of my book, I put a little suggested books page. One of them is The Gods of Eden by William Bramley. Mm-hmm. The Gods of the New Millennium by Alan Alford. Another one that's it touches on the alien extraterrestrial subject, but also goes into conspiracy theories, which is called Behold a Pale Horse by William Cooper. And I also gave reference to Alien Agenda by Jim Marrs. So those are all the books that provided me with a lot of information and the details that I needed to put the story together.
Okay, and this is kind of a judgment thing. You can claim your Fifth Amendment right on this.
Sure.
How closely to the mythic line did you try to keep the story, or was there a certain amount of creative license at play in creating this narrative?
Sure. So I tried to stick to the theory as much as possible. There's a lot of other fictional stories out there that touch on the ancient astronaut theories. For instance, Prometheus has touched on it, the movie Prometheus, but they went off into their own alien franchise. I tried to stick to the theories as much as possible. I found that there were many parallels between the Book of Genesis as to the Sumerian writings, to the more ancient Sumerian writings. And just that alone, many of my stories are connected to those writings, which basically also touch on the stories of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, the flood, and then the Tower of Babel. Those are all covered in my book.
Now, I don't necessarily disagree that there are ties between the Sumerian material and the Bible. And actually, my ongoing commentary is whoever put the Bible together had like this, 5-gallon drum of whiteout. And every time it said gods, they had to white out the entire story so that, it's not that the story isn't there. There's just big chunks missing because they can't talk about, Enki fighting Enlil or whoever you want to call these gods in that culture. Because if there's only one God, how can they fight with each other? So you have to just get rid of the entire story. But why did you choose to add in, obviously the flood story you find everywhere, but like Adam and Eve, they definitely got a very specific narrative in the Bible that I have not found in that detail in Sumerian writing.
Right. Well, I did use some creative license, obviously, to write a story. I write this in my intro that any book, unless it's based on specific research, I could not consider my book nonfiction or based on a true story. I wasn't there, even if it was proved to be true. We weren't there. We didn't hear their conversations. We didn't see the exact situations between the characters that existed in that at the time. So I had to put in some pieces to kind of tie everything together. And if the theory of the Anunnaki creating humanity was true, then there must have been some original people. And that is why I tied it to the story of Adam and Eve. And at what point did they go off on their own and were no longer serving the Anunnaki or living under their direct guidance?
Well, I'm like, do I want to follow this line or do I want to bounce back? Well, let's just keep here for a second. So based on, your research, what created that separation? I mean, we all know about, the serpent and the apple and getting kicked out of Eden, but in your research, what created the rift between them, or is it just mostly coming from the biblical narrative?
In some aspects, I have taken things from the biblical narrative and tried to adapt it to this theory. What my theories are that when the Anunnaki originally created man to work for them and serve them, they never intended to create a conscious, self-conscious being. They were trying to enhance the existing creatures of Earth to work for them, just like current humans use cattle and horses and things like that, and animals like that to serve them. They were doing the same thing, except they crossed the line when they basically kept upgrading their creation to the point where man became self-conscious, and they realized that. And I think that they were not much different than humans are today as far as their conscious and their outlook on life. So they saw that this was a conscious being, and they could no longer keep them under control. They weren't trying to replicate what we know as slavery, but more of the servitude of another creature.
Well, see, I like your angle, and it definitely reflects kind of my angle. I don't like that slave word,
right?
Because I don't think that I don't feel like our mentality is that we're a slave species, but our mentality is definitely that we're a domesticated species, which, even though it's just a very subtle change, really is a big change.
Right. I mean, although we may be domesticated, as you said, there's still a lot of problems with humanity, and that could be a mixture of the confusion of our history, as well as some of the animalistic traits that still remained within us, that we have to control by spiritually evolving.
Well, that would be good.
Yeah, that would be. But I think that most people do have it in them, and it's just a matter of the proper surroundings and upbringing.
No, this is true. And if you read enough of the Eastern texts, or, it's not even just the Eastern text, it is something that humanity has been aspiring for millennia, to move out of the fall, the fall of man, so to speak, and move back into a non-three-dimensional world where we, at one point in time supposedly lived.
Right. And I mean, there's many accounts of these gods, whether they were in the Sumerian cultures, whether they were in the ancient Indian culture, and many others, that they actually were written about as leaders and as teachers to humanity. They not only taught humanity civilization and technology, or at least the technology from back then, but they also tried to spiritually awaken. They tried to teach humanity about the proper living, how to connect to the energy that exists in all. And there's evidence for that in many civilizations that tie together.
So do you think that the Anunnaki were physical beings? Do you think they were, as some people suggest, interdimensional beings? What's your thought on that?
I think that there was a point. I think that they possibly evolved as well throughout the history. I think that when they first arrived to Earth, they were physical beings. I think that at some point they left, and possibly some stayed behind. And I actually have some theories that once they left, they were able to ascend to another level of energy, of living, where they no longer needed to interact with our planet, or they interacted with us on another level in a different way. But the ones that did not ascend, or the ones that did not return, remained grounded on Earth and kind of stayed behind and ruled humanity from the shadows.
So do you think they're still here?
I think it's definitely possible that they're here, and there's so few of them that all they can do is basically create this pyramid structure of control over the leaders of the world leaders and religious leaders, and everybody else just can't know about them in order for them to remain in control. And I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
And I was just going to say that all of these things we're talking about are theories, speculation. I don't like to say that I believe this. Like I have faith that this is the absolute truth, but I do believe that that these are the possibilities that exist.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I like the way that you kind of, there's what I believe, and then there's, what evidence suggests, which is two different things. There's what I believe, and then there's what this material suggests.
Right.
But with that said, kind of going back to that conspiracy thing, I really didn't ever investigate that whole notion of extraterrestrial control of the Earth, until fairly recently. And that whole concept to me is actually kind of scary.
Yeah. Well, it's like this, my interest started with just being interested in what exists out there. Are there extraterrestrials? Have there ever been documentation of them? Then I started coming across these books and these theories of the ancient astronaut theory. And the more you research it, the more pieces start to connect to history, to the current global situation, to kingship that has existed throughout time, and to many of the customs and cultures that exist all over the world. Everything ends up being connected the more you read into this subject.
Mm-hmm. But it's still really scary. Because it just is, level upon level, and you start looking at what's going on in the world or what has gone on in the world from a very different perspective. It's not like this whole kumbaya moment.
Yeah,
one of
definitely not.
All right. Yeah, I wrote this one article, and I talk about the domestication of humanity. And, one of the things that happened with civilization is that we started gathering in towns and cities, and there are people that speculate that these extraterrestrials are trying to feed off of our energy. And it's like, well, how convenient is that? We're all living in these cities. It's like they don't even have to scavenge around for us. We're just in our own little self-made pens and just right there hanging out. That's a scary thought. To have that even go through your mind, that's a scary thought.
Yeah, how about this thought? The main one of the focuses of the theory is that the Anunnaki came here in search for gold for their planet and for various other uses. We're still collecting gold to this day, and we're hoarding it, and the governments are keeping it concentrated in these specific areas that are well known to everyone. And even lately, there's so many incentives for people to trade in their gold for cash, and everybody's running to these little stores trading in their gold for cash, and that gets melted down and gets sent to these giant locations of gold. So if they ever need it, they know exactly where to get it.
And I'm going to have to tell you, I don't agree with Sitchin's gold theory. I agree that gold was important, but I couldn't find the gold, Alex. I just couldn't find the gold. Although I did speculate, okay, this was a speculation, that they used gold to cover their skin because they were sensitive to sunlight. And maybe there was, he was kind of following that same track, but kind of made it a bigger thing. I don't know.
Yeah, that's one of the pieces to it that is debatable. If they were looking for the gold, what were they using it for? And, there's a lot of theories on that. Some people believe that they would convert it to some ingestible form that would that would basically expand their lifespans. There's evidence that it can be used to purify the air. There's actually some medieval churches that used to coat their stained glass windows with gold, with nanoparticles of gold that would end up purifying the air in those churches. So they've had this technology or this know-how for many, many years, and it goes back to ancient history.
See, and that's the part that I find amazing is that we are just now rediscovering some of the sciences. I'm not sure how else to put this, but some of the sciences that our ancestors knew about thousands and thousands of years ago, that if you suggested it, 100 years ago, like we were just talking about the Dogon in the last hour, and about, that they were these extraterrestrials and blah, blah, blah. But the guy who did the primary documentation of that culture, I mean, how could he wrap his mind around these extraterrestrials in the 1930s? Right.
And not only that, but they were describing the stars, the Sirius star, and that it was a binary system, and there was a white dwarf as well. These kinds of things that they were describing only came about later with modern astronomical machinery, with special equipment. And they were able to describe this stuff without having any of that kind of equipment. So they must have learned it from somewhere else.
I mean, that's the part that just kind of kills me, is that there's all of this information. It just seems like, as we move forward and our understanding of technology moves forward, we're rediscovering stuff that it seems we knew in the past, but have amnesia from.
Right. At some point, humanity was a lot smaller, was more connected to these ancients that were very knowledgeable. This knowledge was passed down, and gradually humanity began to spread around the earth and, I guess, get dumbed down or lose that ancient knowledge and start all over again. Some say that it's possible that the ancient flood, which archaeologists have recently also came out and said that it is possible that there was a global flood, or there was many floods happening around the same time around the earth, that was kind of a reboot for humanity. That prior to that, there was a lot more knowledge and a lot more connectivity between people on earth, and then it was started all over again.
Well, and I hate, just kind of going back. I'm in the middle of his book, but I had a guest on a couple weeks ago, Dr. Michael Witzel, and one of the things he suggests, and I haven't quite fully processed his theory, although I do like it, is that many of the myths that we find, especially circumnavigating the world, like the flood story, actually evolved prior to modern man or Cro-Magnon or whatever moving out of Africa, and that's which was like 100,000 years ago. Which there is stuff that happened 100,000 years ago, and but when you throw that date out because of the commonality of the flood story, it would also implicate or suggest, or whatever the correct word would be, that the flood happened 100,000 BC. And maybe the reason no one ever finds any evidence of this global flood is because, and I've said this before, they're not looking at the right place. They're not looking at the right area in our history, our archaeological history. They're looking 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, and maybe that's not a true date. Maybe we need to look further back.
Right. I mean, if you've ever seen even a recent flood zone, it's basically covered in mud and everything is buried. So if you think about it being even 10,000 or even 50,000 years ago, something like that would have been long decayed and buried. All of the evidence would be buried and decayed. In fact, they've found plenty of underwater cities and metropolises all over the world. They found these underwater ruins that used to be above ground. So that alone proves that there was flooding, and that the coasts have changed everywhere. And people back then may have not all escaped. Some may have escaped, and while others didn't. And if they had to escape in a hurry, then all their documents and everything, all their knowledge may have been destroyed.
Mm-hmm. And now we're just left with speculation. But at least we're speculating and not living in this brainwashed world that, excuse me, that got taken over, a couple of thousand years ago with something that really makes no sense at all to our history.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're not just speculating. We're picking up the pieces that we can find, and there's plenty of pieces to still be found. If by people who turn a blind eye to it or say, this can't be true and that's it, we're just ignoring our history. We're ignoring the possible pasts, the different possibilities that may have taken place. We need more people to be interested in this, to pick up the pieces, to, we have many theorists in different subjects, but then we need people that take these theories and put them together into a storyline. And that's kind of what I try to do with my book.
So in it, there are pictures of the Anunnaki, and you represent them as being humanoid in form, and I have a couple other little comments on it. Why did you make that choice? I guess that's the question. Why did you make them humanoid?
Well, one of my basis for their description and just them being around was Zecharia Sitchin's books, as well as all the Sumerian carvings and tablets. And they were depicted by the Sumerians as humanoid. Not only the Sumerians, but many of the biblical texts describe angels also as humanoid. The ancient Sanskrits describe the similar gods also as humanoid. I mean, everywhere you look in these ancient cultures, they never really talk about. I mean, sometimes they talk about other types of beings, whether they're reptilian, amphibian, but they're still usually in some humanoid form. Whether their skin is different, or their hair is different, or their eyes are different, but they're usually in a humanoid form. And that's why I try to stick to the ancient stories as well as the theories and combine them into my book.
One of the things that I noticed is in the images, many of the individuals had these kind of big, I don't want to say pointy, but kind of pointy hats on. And the first thing that came into my mind are the representations and the practice of cranial deformation, where they would elongate the head and then wear some kind of a headdress to make it look even bigger. Was that a conscious decision to give them kind of these big pointy heads, or did that just end up that way?
Yeah, I mean, I try to base things on many of these ancient depictions of the ancient cultures. There are heads, giant heads found in Turkey, near an ancient site called Göbekli Tepe, where they have these pointy hats and these longer heads. The ancient Egyptians depicted some of their gods with these types of heads. In South America, they've been depicted, and they've been deforming their own skulls to mimic those types of skull formations. So definitely I took influence from there and applied that to the description of the Anunnaki.
Well, I thought that was cool. So there are a number of people who believe, or I don't know if they believe, but I don't know, seem to imply, that's a good way of saying it, that the Anunnaki are the only group of extraterrestrials that have come to the Earth, that exist in the galaxy, whatever. What's your thought on that?
Well, I mean, if you just look at it mathematically and the way even lately astronomers have been saying how there can be life supported on different types of planets, on planets that orbit brown dwarfs, not just stars. The chances that there's other intelligent life forms out there are, I mean, almost 100%. Because why should we believe that we're the only ones, or even if us and the Anunnaki can be the only ones, or that these other beings are all humanoid? Not necessarily. There may be some programming in the evolutionary pattern that kind of creates beings to have the two arms and be symmetrical and things like that. There's certain patterns, but even if just looking around on Earth, we have a lot of differences just amongst our human species. I'm sure that difference becomes even more vast the further out you go into space. I also think that if another civilization evolved millions of years ago, somewhere a little further out, then they may have visited us in the past, and they may still be visiting us, which leads to the whole UFO phenomenon.
Cool. Do you think in the material that you studied, I mean, I just want to kind of keep on this thread.
Sure.
In this material that you studied, that there are implications that these other groups are represented in the writings? I mean, like in the biblical narrative, I think so, because there's the God, like in the Adam and Eve story, there's God that tells Adam and Eve, like, don't eat from the tree or you're going to die, and then there's the serpent character, which seem like two very different, warring factions almost.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find that in your research and did that get incorporated into your graphic novel in the beginning?
Well, the serpent character I depicted as, and this is widely accepted amongst the ancient astronaut theory, as Enki, who was also humanoid like the others. But I did include, and this is towards the end of the story, towards the end of the book, I did include another race of aliens that are just, the subject is just touched on. I'm leaving it open for future sequels and other ideas.
Oh, a movie writer right up front, right?
Yeah.
Got to leave it open for the sequel.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would have been, I could have gone on and on in this book.
Kidding,
I could have gone on and on with this book, but I wanted to finish the project and, leave some ideas open for future books.
So in your research, where do you think the Anunnaki came from?
Well, the theory is that they came from a planet called Nibiru. Lately, there's been it's that theory. Well, originally Zecharia Sitchin wrote that it was just a planet that was far out in our own solar system. But lately, there's been a little bit more added to that theory, as far as there being a potential brown dwarf that is a binary part of our binary system of our own sun. And Nibiru orbits that brown dwarf. Obviously, would orbit it a lot closer than we orbit our sun because the brown dwarf isn't as powerful. But everything I try to base on actual scientific fact or research. So there's a lot of astronomers that have found that habitable planets can exist around these brown dwarfs, and there are actually more of them than stars in the universe or in our local galaxy.
And I'm familiar with that brown dwarf. I mean, I haven't, done an in-depth investigation. I know that one of the things that Zecharia Sitchin talks about is the 3,600-year cycle, 3,200-year cycle. And did you find any parallels with the movement of that brown dwarf that might suggest that we're talking about the same astronomical body?
Well, yeah. I mean, there in 1983, I believe there was some scientists that detected something large out in our own solar system. That article came out, and then there was not much follow up after that. But there's been a whole bunch of astronomers ever since that have calculated the way the planets are arranged in our currently known solar system. Some of the planets are tilted a certain way, the way comets are being thrusted in certain directions, and this large body that may exist out there explains how all these formations came to be. What's causing this additional gravity or this additional force to affect the planets we know of today. That's one of the pieces to it. But there's other evidence. I mean, the Sumerians counted. They had something called a sar, which is like what we call a year, which equaled to the 3,600 years. They actually, prior to a certain, the Sumerians kept a long king list, going back tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. So the most recent kings that they documented lived normal human lifespans. But as you go further and further back, the lifespans that they've documented, and they have their names and the descriptions and everything, their lifespan begins to increase. First it gets into the hundreds of years, then it gets into the thousands of years, and at some point going back, they actually counted SARS instead of years. So some of their rulers that they go back to were known to be part god or demigods, and they were supposedly lived for 10 SARS or 8 SARS, or at least ruled for that long. Not lived, ruled for that long, which equals to 28,000 years, 36,000 years. The same thing if you look at the biblical stories. They also talk about the original patriarchs living extended lifespans, also in the hundreds of years. So that kind of connects to the SARS and the 3,600 year count of Nibiru circling or basically getting closer to Earth every 3,600 years. Now, I don't think that 3,600 year is an exact number, and my theory is that some of the astronomically aligned megaliths around the world were meant to basically calculate this approach, or when is the next approach based on other alignments.
I've read a lot about the SARS, and I find it interesting that people will put out, oh, well, the SARS are actually talking about moon cycles and not annual cycles. So when you take the however many SARS and convert it into years, it ends up being 26,000 years, 32,000 years. I mean, a lot of years. But then people say, oh, no, it's really moon cycles, and it takes the number and makes it really small. But what I find interesting is that when you look at mythology from areas outside of the Middle East, you also find these extended lifetimes of some of the very ancient gods. And so I don't understand why they say, oh, well, this can't be, when there's, in my opinion, evidence to suggest that it was a common thing.
Right, and I mean, even just with the Sumerians, why would they go back and change it? Why would they count in SARS up to a certain point and then start counting in years and then gradually decrease that amount? It doesn't make sense. If they were consistent, they would have counted in years the whole time. The fact that they have to count in SARS shows that the years was just too lengthy for them to even state. They were the measurements back then were a lot different, and then, like you said, if you compare it to all these other cultures, they have common stories. So either it all goes back to one fictional story, or there's some truth in it that just has been lost over the time.
I mean, I just think that it's interesting that post-flood, the lifespan of humanity drops down to where it is today, and it's been in that same place for the last, minimally, right, I have to come up with a good number, 6,000 years, more likely 10 to 12,000 years.
Right.
But, and I have some theories on that, but I'm working on a new article on that topic. Well, that's not the topic. It's just one of the byproducts of that topic. So I'm not going to share yet. But it's a really weird and interesting angle. And I'll throw this out. It has to do with GMOs, contemporary GMOs, because I find it very interesting, when you start looking at the record, like the creation of man and all of this stuff, there's definitely this whole piece about genetic modification that you find in it. I mean, isn't that what you discovered?
Yeah. I mean, the genetic modification in the food, and then that food could leach into our own genetics and start altering us. Who knows what direction that will take us? There's been a lot of different genetic alterations in ancient history, and part of it was the mixing of different human species, and now there's more basically interference with these crops that are being completely altered.
So when we were created, was it Well, I'll just back the question up and just ask more generic. So, based on your research, how were we created?
Well, the theory is that we were genetically altered from an existing being on Earth. Evolution still exists. Basically, on Earth, hominids evolved, and their skeletons have been found. They've been found going back million of years. And at some point, when the Anunnaki arrived, they found these hominids, and they decided to experiment on them, give them upgrades using their own genetic patterns. Whether they took their genetics and combined it directly, or they were able to reprogram the existing genetics, that part is unknown. But they gradually upgraded this being to be able to be intelligent enough or subservient enough to basically work for them, to not just mine for gold, but tend their gardens, create their food sources. There wasn't many of them here. Supposedly they only came here, and a few hundred of them, let's say, back then, for their mission, and they needed assistance. They had specific roles, but they also needed workers, and that was their solution.
Yeah, it sounded like those gods didn't really want to do a whole lot. Wait, we're gods. We don't have to do that.
Right. Well, also, if you think about it, it's not that much different than humans are today. I mean, humans still use animal labor all over the world, and they may have been just like that. To them, the hominids that existed that they found were not on their intellectual level, and they didn't see them as anything more than any other animal on this planet.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. And so many people have just this giant issue around that whole kind of moral concept. Like, well, how could they think about us that way? We're humans. It's like, excuse me, we do animal testing on monkeys and rabbits and dogs. It's like, really?
Right. I'm not saying I support those kinds of tests, but we've been doing it as a race, as a species. We've been doing it for as long as we've had that technology. So some people right now feel that it's immoral, and maybe some Anunnaki felt it was immoral, and that may be the reason why we began to diverge from them and kind of go off on our own and create our own civilizations all over this planet, all while being confused of our origins.
So what do you think happened to them? I mean, because if they were here and they were mining or doing whatever they were doing, what happened to them? Because obviously, okay, I mean, there's our little conspiracy thing that there's a few left, kind of running things from their secret underground base, the reptile cave or whatever we're going to call it. But what happened to the other numbers that were here? I mean, did they just leave? Where'd they go?
Yeah, I mean, just like if we were to send humans to explore another planet, they would most likely want to come back to their families and their own planet, and that's what they did. They went back. They finished their mission. They returned, and if it's true that they live on Nibiru and it takes several thousand years to orbit, and their technology may not be that advanced where they can travel here at any point. So their window of opportunity may only exist every several thousand years, and they may have been, last time they may have been here was between 3,000 and 4,000 years ago, and they had to go back, and their next window of opportunity could be any time in the future, if they want to come back here at all.
Well, I've always looked at the Bible, when did God stop talking to people in the Bible? Having those one-on-ones. Because he came and talked to Moses one-on-one. His ship came down onto the top of the mountain. And it seems like, that was about 1500 BC, 1300 BC.
Right.
So I was like, okay, so, if we're going to keep on this cycle, we should be due for another visit. You're pretty quick.
Yeah, well, it could be 50 to 100 years from now. That would still be within the vicinity of today. And it's not, I mean, it really depends on what religion or what ancient culture you look at or you read about, because there's many different perspectives and descriptions of speaking to God or speaking to angels. Angels have been described also as humanoid. They've always been there to warn man of something that's about to happen. They've passed down some important information to a variety of humans throughout history, or at least they've been described that way. And they've also been described as flying in chariots. Meanwhile, they're depicted with wings. So a lot of things don't really line up. They don't really make sense when you look at them literally. But when you start to analyze and think, why would an angel who has wings, who may need a chariot that flies? And then the way they're described in the Old Testament, that they actually commingled with humanity and had children with them. All of that, basically, if you take a step back, it sounds like extraterrestrials that are very close to our own species.
I don't know how you can get around that. And just say, oh, well, no, it's not. Because the only other thing that it could be is some other group of individuals that were on the earth in our very, very remote past. And there was, this little group that survived that became the god. And that's a possibility, but we still, which is why that guy's book of the 100,000 year date is intriguing to me, because it answers the question how the mythology, or I'm hoping it answers the question, how the mythology got into remote places like Australia, how it got into the Americas, because it has to go back far enough in time to have spread there.
Right.
And so...
Right. The thing is that, yeah, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
The thing is that, yeah, that's definitely one of the possibilities that I've actually considered, that there existed a previous human race on this planet that was so advanced. Many of them perished through some calamity on Earth, and the ones that remained were considered gods and ended up ruling some other humans that were not as advanced technologically. That's definitely possible. And that's one of the other possibilities that I've considered. But when you look at some other cultures, like the ancient Sanskrits, they had a god they referred to as Vishnu, and his heavenly abode was in the constellation, Capricorn constellation. Then there's all these other, the Hopis, and there's some remnants of groups that lived in the Peruvian mountains, and they all talk about these gods or these previous beings coming from the stars, coming from the heavens. So, unless this other race just had airplanes and they were flying around, they were coming from somewhere else.
Well, and you see that verbiage over and over again. It's like, how can you just ignore it and go, there are so many people that will make the comments. It's like, well, they're just archetypes, or, it's just their imagination. It's like, and everybody has the same imagination.
Right. And then you have to also take a look at the Apocrypha, which are the excluded books of the holy, books that exist. There's some that have been accepted by the church and by the three main religions, and there are some that have been discarded. One of the most popular books like that is called the Book of Enoch, where he actually describes being taken up into the heavens by the angels. They're teaching him about the patterns of the stars, about the sun. He actually described the 365-day year. So all these things sounds like he was in space, or at least looking at a depiction of space. And that's just one example. There's countless amounts of others.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally agree. I had a question. It just it left my brain.
Mm-hmm. Well, we were talking about earlier about the parallels between the Book of Genesis and the Sumerian writings. There's actually a school of thought called Pan-Babylonianism that is way before Zecharia Sitchin came out with his books. It goes back to the 19th century, and someone by the name of Alfred Jeremias advocated it, basically traced all these commonalities between the Book of Genesis and the Epic of Creation, and several other Sumerian epics. There are connections to the 6 days of 6 to 7 days of creation, or 6 days of creation and then the seventh day of rest. There are, which corresponds to the generations of the gods in the Sumerian writings. There are connections to the Adam creation of Adam's story. There are connections to the Noah's flood with the Epic of Gilgamesh. That one has the most parallels that even biblical scholars can't deny. And there's some that stepped forward and said, yes, there's definitely a root in the Sumerian writings that the biblical texts have taken from.
Yeah, I just think that it is wonderful and a blessing that all of the texts have been discovered. I mean, there might even be a whole lot more that we haven't found yet in Sumeria, because they do date pretty far back, and they are the most congruent. They're carved in stone. You can't argue about it. You can't say, well, that was really written down at this date, but they don't really know. I mean, these were written down, and they can look at the grammatical usage of words and the linguistic characteristics. I mean, very scientific. And, and identify how old the narrative is based on the linguistics. But it's just, it really gives you a different way and a baseline to start looking at all of these other myths and myth-based systems, because the Bible is a much later iteration of that mythological line.
Right. And then so many different cultures from around the world have similar stories, which means that, each story is different, but they're all similar. They're all, like, the Hopis talk about a flood. The Middle East, many flood stories all over South America. I mean, there's flood stories all over the world. The ancient Indians talk about it. In fact, the Hopis and the ancient Indians have something in common, where they both believe that we are now living in the fourth age, and humanity has been recycled prior. And there's been prior ages where we also went through a process. It may have been a different process, it may have been a different stage of humanity, but that's something that parallels from an ancient culture going back thousands and thousands of years in India to the Hopis, who have been in the Americas for a very long time. And they believe that.
Yeah, but there's no connection. Alex, this has been great, but our time is up. So if people want to get a copy of your graphic novel, In the Beginning, The Epic of the Anunnaki, where can they go?
So the book is sold on my website, inthebeginningthebook.com. I also have a Facebook page. It's facebook.com/inthebeginningthebook. On the Facebook page, I post related content, articles, and theories almost on a daily basis. So there's a lot of interesting information there. So I'm always expanding on my research. I encourage everybody else to contribute, do their own research. Don't take anyone's word for it. And my book tries to tie everything in together, visualize a nice story, and it leaves it off at the end where it really gets people thinking. And that can be, you can buy the book at inthebeginningthebook.com.
Well, and I was just thinking, a lot of the listeners are obviously more seasoned adults. I don't think I have teenagers listening to the show, but they might have children that they want to introduce to this subject matter, and this would be a beyond perfect introduction. Christmas is coming up; it would make a great stocking stuffer.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, the way it's written, it's for, I wouldn't say all ages. I wouldn't say it's for young children, but it's definitely written geared for an intelligent child or teenager, or adults as well. I mean, it's definitely geared towards adults. The story, even though it's a comic book, and people usually associate comic books with children, graphic novels are actually meant for adults, and that's the way it's been written.
Right, but I could see a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old picking it up and again, being introduced to the subject matter.
Definitely, yeah, definitely. So, 16, 17 is perfect age to...
Yeah. Well, okay, Alex, I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and you'll have to keep me informed of any new projects you have coming up.
Definitely will. Thank you for having me.
Okay, well, thank you. Okay, that was Alex Teplish. See, I said it right this time. And his book is In the Beginning, The Epic of the Anunnaki. The webpage is inthebeginningthebook.com. And next week, we're going to be speaking with Scott Wolter on the Kensington Runestone. And you might know Scott from his show, America Unearthed, on the History Channel. So until next week, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. That was my Chupacabra Bitsy. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser to www